Welcome to our webinar study session on homelessness. Our first speaker is Rabbi Bruce Cadden, our 10 Minutes of Torah thought leader for the book of Genesis. Rabbi Cadden is a rabbi at Temple Bethel in Tacoma, Washington. He and his wife Barbara Binder Cadden have written extensively about Jewish education and have co-authored 3 books: Teaching Mitzvot, Concepts, Values, and Activities, Teaching Tefillah, Insights and Activities on Prayer, and Teaching Jewish Life Cycle, Traditions, and Activities. It's my pleasure to introduce Rabbi Bruce Cadden.
Thank you, Audrey, and good morning or afternoon, depending on where you are. I think it's a great day for many reasons. I'm particularly proud to be from Washington State, one of the states to pass marriage equality. And the sun is shining here, which doesn't happen often from November to March. So I think that we all know that our study of Torah can be influenced by what's going on in our lives and things that are happening around us. But sometimes we don't even recognize it. This past year, recently, as I was preparing to write 10 Minutes of Torah, our congregation had just been selected to participate in a faith and family homelessness project, which with other synagogues, churches, mosques in the greater Puget Sound area through Seattle University and funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So obviously that topic was on my mind. Now, like I'm sure most of you had read Parashat Vayera from the book of Genesis many times through, not only in its natural cycle during the year as we did last week, but also when we read from it on the High Holy Days, Genesis chapter 21 in some congregations, chapter 22 in other congregations, or both for those who do 2 days and read those. But this time I was struck, as I hadn't been before, about the theme of homelessness and reading through it. And we will see that in a moment, but first want to set the stage. Genesis chapter 21 begins with the birth of Isaac, but no sooner does Isaac come on the scene when there is trouble, as represented in this verse from Genesis 21. Now Sarah saw the son that Hagar the Egyptian had born to Abraham playing. And the Hebrew word for playing is mitzachek, which of course is the same root as the name of Isaac. The rabbis point out that this particular root can have 3 different connotations, and look at 3 passages that reflect a different aspect of the root and might indicate what this playing was all about. They point to Exodus chapter 32 and the story of the golden calf, which says, early next day the people offered up burnt offerings and brought sacrifices of well-being. They sat down to eat and drink and rose to dance, and the Hebrew word is litzachek. So in this case, what Ishmael and Isaac may have been doing, or what Ishmael had been doing with Isaac, is something to do with some form of idolatry. And obviously that's considered reprehensible. Second use of the root is in the Joseph narrative, Genesis 39:14, when Potiphar's wife summoned her household servants and spoke to them, saying, "See, he," meaning Joseph, "brought us a Hebrew man," he, meaning Potiphar's husband, "brought us a Hebrew man, Joseph, to toy with us," litzachek. And in this case, the implication is some type of sexual immorality. And then finally, from 2 Samuel chapter 2, verse 14, Abner said to Joab, "Let the young men come forward and sport," or fight, vitsahaku, before us. And even though this verse, the word is written with a sin, the rabbis recognize that it's the same as if it would be written with a tzadi. And so in this case, it's something to do with war or killing. So these are the types of things that the rabbis imagined might have been happening between Ishmael and Isaac. And then finally, it is also pointed out that really what Sarah is upset about is that Ishmael seems to be trying to show that that he's the real Isaac, the one who deserves to inherit from Abraham, and that is so much of what disturbs her. Okay, we can move on. So here's where we move into what happens next. Sarah said to Abraham, "Throw this slave girl and her son out." And this is what immediately reminded me of homelessness. Now, of course, when we read this, most of the time we don't think of that. We think of the fact, of course, that Ishmael represents, according to tradition, the line of the Arab people who eventually produced Islam, and of course Isaac the line of Judaism. So oftentimes we look at it in terms of Jewish-Muslim, Jewish-Arab relationships. Sometimes we look at it just in terms of a family situation. But as I said, looking through it in regard with what was going on with our synagogue, said, suddenly they are homeless. Now, as I read through this verse, though, pay attention to what's there and what's not there. Sarah said to Abraham, "Throw this slave girl and her son out. The son of this slave girl is not going to share in the inheritance with my son Isaac." This grieved Abraham greatly on account of his son. But God said to Abraham, "Do not be grieved over the boy or your slave. Do whatever Sarah tells you, for it is through Isaac that offspring shall be called yours. Yet I will also make a nation out of the children of the slave's son, for he too is your offspring." Although Sarah, Abraham, and Isaac are each named in this passage, neither Hagar nor Ishmael is. Hagar is referred to as this slave girl, or later on, even by God, as your slave. And Ishmael is referred to as her son, the son of this slave girl, his son, etc. So that, to me, jumped out at me and said, when people are homeless, it's as if they don't have a name. And for many of us, the homeless are nameless individuals, faceless individuals often, people who we don't encounter. And so that was the first lesson that jumped out of me from this text. Okay, we can go on with the next slide. As the story continues, Hagar and Ishmael go off, and we learn that when the water in the skin was gone, Hagar cast the child away under a bush. She walked away, sat down on the other side at a remove, thinking, "Let me not see the child's death." There on the other side, she sat and wept in a loud voice. God heard the boy's cry, and from heaven an angel of God called to Hagar and said, "What is troubling you, Hagar? Have no fear, for God has heard the cry of the lad where he is." What jumped out at me again in looking at this story in the context of homelessness is that although the text clearly says that Hagar wept and doesn't say anything about Ishmael, it says that God heard the boy's cry. And what I interpreted that to mean in this context was that sometimes our cries are aloud, as Hagar's cry was, and sometimes cries are silent. And in essence, for me, this was saying God heard the silent cry of Ishmael and responded. And so often with regard to the issue of homelessness, it is the silence that is there from people who have lost their voice for one reason or another, who are struggling to just survive and often don't have the ability, the capacity to even cry out or advocate for themselves anymore, and that's something we particularly have to respond to. Okay, next slide. In repeating the last verse, there's another interesting aspect. God heard the boy's cry, and from heaven an angel of God called to Hagar and said, "What is troubling you, Hagar? Have no fear, for God has heard the cry of the lad where he is." And this is a phrase that seems to be a little redundant from the text. Could have just said, God heard the cry of the lad. So this provides opportunities for the commentators to try to explain what it's doing here. And Rashi comments that according to the actions he is now doing, shall he be judged, and not according to what he may do in the future. Because the ministering angels laid information against him, saying, Master of the universe, for him whose descendants will kill your children with thirst, will you provide a well? And God's response to the ministering angels was, what is he now, righteous or wicked? They replied to him, righteous. God said to him, according to his present deeds will I judge him. In the context of homelessness, this said to me that we need to respond to those who are homeless where they are now, not thinking about, where they're going to be at a later point. We've often heard people say that it's a problem we can't solve because people just will end up back being homeless, or people have alcohol, drug, or other challenges that will simply lead them back to where they were. This says to me that that's not an acceptable way to think about the problem. We have to respond to the people where they are in their circumstances at the moment, and then not worry about what may come later. Okay, last slide. So just to review the lessons that I think come from this passage regarding homelessness. First of all, the challenge to know those who are homeless by name, because it offers us a personal connection to them and to their stories. Not allow them to be nameless or faceless individuals, finding opportunities to meet them. We just, as part of our program here at the synagogue, hosted a panel where we had a family and one other individual who have experienced homelessness speak about their circumstances, so people in our community would hear it from people who have experienced it. Second of all, we need to respond to the homeless even when their cries might be silent. There are so many important issues that need to be addressed, and sometimes the issue of homelessness gets pushed back because of other important issues. But we need to continually remind ourselves of this challenge and do what we can to respond. And then finally, the third lesson from, I think, this passage is we need to meet the homeless where they are, reaching out our hands and our hearts to those in need, responding to the needs in the best way that we can as individuals and as a Jewish community. So I'm going to stop here, and I think can take a couple of questions now before we continue with the next part of the webinar.
So again, everyone, please feel free to, at this time, note any questions you have in the questions log, or raise your hand by clicking that hand icon on the Jut Out tab to your control panel, and I will unmute you, and you can speak your question or comment to the group. I don't see any hands or anything in the questions log at the moment. At the end of the webinar, we will be providing Rabbi Cadden's contact info, so if something should strike you, you will have the opportunity to be in touch with him. But let's go ahead and I'll turn it back over to Audrey and she can introduce our next presenters.
Thank you. Thank you, Rabbi Cadden, very much. And our next speaker is Rachel Banks. She's a legislative assistant at the Religious Action Center, the RAC. Rachel grew up attending Temple Emmanuel in Dallas, Texas. She recently graduated from Brandeis, where she majored in international and global studies. And at the RAC, her portfolio includes economic justice, separation of church and state, disability rights, and interreligious affairs. It's my pleasure to introduce Rachel Banks.
Thanks, Audrey. So in this part of the presentation, I'm going to give a brief review of some statistics about homelessness and then tell you about some legislative action that you can take with your congregation and anybody else. So quantifying the homeless population in the United States is practically impossible. Not only is this a population that is not particularly interested in talking to Census Bureau employees, but also the government and advocacy groups can't agree on a definition of homelessness. The Department of Housing and Urban Development defines the homeless population to include only those living on the streets, in cars, or under bridges, while advocacy organizations also include families living doubled up with relatives or friends after they've lost their own homes. Next slide. Some advocacy groups say that on any given night there are up to 800,000 people on the streets and that 3.5 million people experience homelessness over the course of a year. And there's some more homelessness statistics for you to see on the next slide. As you can see that there's a homeless population that's transient, and then there's also a chronically homeless population that makes up a sizable portion of the homelessness. Next slide. So in Isaiah 58:7, we're taught to share your bread with the hungry and bring the homeless poor into your house. Jewish tradition teaches that it is greater to help a person become self-sufficient than it is to give the person a handout. Housing is a foundation upon which self-sufficiency can be built. Without a place to live, a person can't begin to take charge of his or her life. We learn that helping fellow human beings in need, tzedakah, is not simply a matter of charity, but also one of responsibility, righteousness, and justice. We're told in Proverbs to speak up, judge righteously, champion the poor and needy. So the Bible doesn't merely command us to give to the poor, but also to advocate on their behalf, and advocacy is something that you can do too. Experts agree that the #1 reason people are homeless is because they can't find affordable housing. Families with children, especially single women with children, constitute the fastest growing segment of the homeless population. Many of these families are headed by mothers who are fleeing domestic violence, and most lack the work skills, access to child care, and transportation necessary to lift themselves out of poverty. As housing prices continue to rise and incomes stagnate, the gap between the minimum wage and shelter costs continues to grow. Across America, full-time minimum wage workers can't afford to pay the market fair cost of rent. According to the National Low-Income Housing Coalition, last year the average U.S. employee needed to make over $18 an hour, which is more than twice the federal minimum wage, just to afford a modest 2-bedroom rental and still be able to pay for food and other basic needs. And despite this increased need for assistance as housing costs continue to rise over the past decade and on, funding for federal programs that provide housing assistance for low-income people is constantly under attack. One of those housing programs is called the National Housing Trust Fund, and it was created in 2008 with the purpose of providing funds to build, rehabilitate, and repair affordable housing units for low-income people. At least 75% of the fund's resources are mandated to produce or preserve housing affordable for extremely low-income people. This was the first new housing production program since 1990, and it's the only one focused on housing for those with the lowest incomes. Unfortunately, the fund was set to receive money from Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, which can no longer supply sufficient funds. As a result, funding for this important fund has been scarce, and multiple efforts to provide more funding for it last year failed to pass in both chambers of Congress. President Obama has included $1 billion for the National Housing Trust Fund in his housing priorities for 2012, and he's also included this amount of $1 billion in all of his congressional budget requests. So legislators must work to approve this funding for the National Housing Trust Fund. We need you to act now and urge your members of Congress to approve this funding. So here's how. If you go to the RAC webpage, which you can see on the next slide, this is rac.org, RAC.org, and on your home page you'll see that same left-hand tab where it says Act, and if you click the Act with the tools next to it, you'll get the page that you're seeing now, and then you'll click Take Action Now, and it will take you to the following page, which is a list of current action alerts that we have on our website. And that second to last one is Support Housing for Low-Income Families, and if you click on that, it will send you to a page with a little bit more background about the trust fund and a way to email your members of Congress to tell them to fund the Housing Trust Fund at $1 billion. If there's any questions, we can take them now.
Again, feel free to raise your hands and note those questions in the questions log, and we will relay them to the presenters. Okay, again, the contact information for Rachel will be provided on the last slide. So if you do have any questions that strike you, you will be able to be in contact. We just had a question come in. Wendy Spears asks, what can we do in our communities?
That's a great question. This is Isaac Newell. I'm the manager of Congregational Social Action here at the Religious Action Center. One of the biggest initiatives that we've seen Reformed congregations really taking part in across North America is a group called the Interfaith Hospitality Network. Our hope was that we'd have one of our congregations that was involved with IHN on this webinar to present a little bit, but unfortunately we weren't able to coordinate that piece. The Interfaith Hospitality Network is it's essentially community-based. So you take a city, say Cincinnati, and different houses of worship all get together to basically provide shelter for the homeless population. They take, in most cases, a week at a time. So the congregation would take the first week in November and would be responsible for providing a roof and heat and even a meal for the homeless population in the city who could show up and have a safe place to spend the night. They could do that every single night for a week, and then at the end of that week, a new congregation would pick up, maybe a church or a mosque, and it would be an ongoing and rolling process. We've seen incredible success with Interfaith Hospitality Network, and it's something that we would encourage every congregation to look into. It presents incredible opportunity for easy social justice work, but it does require a lot of coordination within your community and your congregation itself. It requires somebody being in your building around the clock so that you have someone who's there from 2 to 4 in the morning in case something happens. It requires a bit of training, but Interfaith Hospitality Network, IHN, is totally capable of providing that and helping you set that up. So we would encourage you as congregations to look into that as an option to help end homelessness.
Great. Any other questions out there? Okay, I don't see any hands, and I don't see any other questions coming through the questions log. So Isaac, I guess we'll turn it back over to you, and you can close us out here.
Sure, thanks. So just to kind of end our session for today, Hurricane Sandy, which we've all certainly heard about and hopefully we'll continue to be aware of over the next several weeks and months, really ravaged the Northeast. Yes, the URJ has set up a fund where you can donate, but what we really want to drive home is that Hurricane Sandy created a whole new homeless population in the Northeast. It destroyed homes, families, neighborhoods, communities, and even did some substantial damage to two Reform synagogues. This is a problem that takes an entire community, the entire Reform community, to really rally around, and the Jewish community as well is so active in the rebuilding and kind of reconvening process, getting everyone back together, helping us reestablish our communities, get back to as much a normal way of life as possible. We would encourage you to really think about ways that your congregation can help when it comes to the Hurricane Sandy relief effort. The URJ just earlier this week formalized our partnership with a group called Nechama, the Jewish Response to Disaster. We are currently looking for volunteers who are able to come to the Northeast or already live in the Northeast to volunteer for any period of time, anything that they're able to offer, whether it's a few hours, a day, or a week or more. Nechama has been able to arrange housing for out-of-state volunteers who might be coming in, and they're working on the ground with several other disaster relief organizations to help the millions of people who are still impacted get back on their feet. There's going to be a long and intensive rebuilding process following Hurricane Sandy. We are well aware of many Reform congregants that have lost homes, many more in the greater community who are really in need of help. And we've got congregations on the ground. North Shore Synagogue in Syosset right now, it comes to mind. They've set up basically a shelter in their congregation. They're providing 3 meals a day to displaced families and individuals, and there's a lot of work that needs to be done. So I would encourage you not only to think about ways that you can volunteer and you can support the relief efforts, but I would also urge you to donate. The URJ has set up a relief fund. You can find it at the long URL at the bottom of your screen right now, or you can just visit urj.org/Sandy. We're updating that webpage as often as possible. We're going to make sure that everyone knows where our allocations are going, how it's helping the communities that are impacted, not just Jewish communities, but the greater area as well. And the only piece that we ask you to do is don't start drives in your congregation or your community. We're waiting on a coordinated effort and a request from one organization to say this is what we need. If you're following rabbis or congregants in the Northeast, you might have seen, oh, we need winter food, or we need winter jackets, or we need food, or we need sanitation supplies. And what we've noticed is that these are turning over very quickly. What congregations are asking for today is not necessarily what they're asking for tomorrow. And so we're working with different disaster relief groups on the ground to provide the money, the volunteers, and even blood that's necessary to get everybody back to normal. Blood being one of the most needed items following any disaster, including Hurricane Sandy. Not necessarily because there were tons of injuries, but because there was a huge stock that was lost when the power went out in the region. So if you're looking to get involved today, but you can't just show up in the Northeast, or you can't give a few dollars, that's fine. Consider donating blood. And those are really the points that we wanted to drive home today. Homelessness is a huge issue. Hurricane Sandy has really made a huge dent in the ability of all communities to respond and react to homelessness in the Northeast. The URJ is on top of this. We're staying involved with our partners in disaster relief through daily emails and phone calls. And as soon as more information becomes available, we'll have it posted at urj.org/Sandy. So that's all we wanted to offer as far as Hurricane Sandy relief. And if there are any other questions, we'll just use this as one last opportunity, and we'll see what we can answer.
Great. We did have a question come in. This is back, I think this is good for Rachel. Is there a way to, or Isaac as well, is there a way to lobby for the loosening of restrictions against the homeless in our communities? Who to speak to, what to say, strategies. A little anecdote, in my neighborhood, there used to be homeless encampments along the freeway concealed by the foliage that was planted as sound blocks. Last year the foliage was removed and the homeless forced to move out.
That's a great question. I would love to talk more to you, Wendy, on the phone. You can call me at the rack, or you can shoot me an email, which will be up on the slide shortly.
We had a question, what is the contact info for Nechama?
Another great question. Nechama's website is available at nechama.org, but also through urj.org/Sandy, we have links to the Nechama website. We also have a volunteer form that you can fill out on our website. That information is all being passed directly to Nechama. You can register as an individual, or you can register a group to volunteer, and they're being very active in reaching out to the people who are putting their name on that list.
It looks like that's all we have. Audrey?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. Thank you everyone for attending today. This is part of a series of webinars, so do stay tuned for any upcoming, and we hope to have you at the next one. Thank you.
Take care.